My name is Maria, and I have co-founded and co-direct the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy with my colleague, Dr. Tim Reed. And there's Tim. He was supposed to be with us today. Unfortunately, he hasn't been able to make it. But the talk really presents our shared work together, the things we have co-created and co-developed through our collaboration. And I've been working with him for about 8 years in various projects. We have written papers together, we have edited books together, we have given talks together. And the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy is really the deepest expression of our collaboration so far. So Tim's background is as a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and a holotropic breathwork practitioner. My background is as a psychotherapist and a systemic family constellations practitioner. And we both share between us decades of commitment to psychological healing, expanded states, and a real passion for depth psychological work. So in 2018, we started collaborating on the book Psychedelics and Psychotherapy, and we integrated our value system and our thoughts around this work. And we also consolidated our intention to work together in co-creating some important structures that we felt would be important for the work in the UK, and start thinking about working as co-therapists in various settings. The course we're running, we run it as a co-therapy dyad. So we started building the Institute of Psychedelic Therapy. We wanted to support the professional development of the work in the UK, support professionals to really network and meet with one another and create a fertile ground for this work to take off within legal frameworks and with a therapeutic mindset in the background. And from there, we developed a 2-year learning container, and the intention is to engage mind, body, heart, and deep psyche, and support intimate encounters with the forces of transformation and change. We wanted a container where people can actually get to know themselves a lot more intimately, get to know themselves a lot more fully. We think that the more acquainted we become with ourselves, the more we get to know our inner territory, the more available we become to ourselves. And then we can work with more peace, more resources, and from a place of greater presence. So the question was, how do we strike a balance between psychological understanding and a deep respect and surrender to mystery? How do we bring these two together? And of course, a combination of theory and really good experiential learning is the way to go there. So we have a vision. We wish to train professionals in depth perspectives. We want them to go in environments that are usually quite clinical and reductive, and bring expanded perspectives in there. So we have a little bit of an infiltration project somewhere in the background. So effective facilitators. For us, effective facilitators are people that have engaged deeply with their inner work. They're familiar with their inner terrain. They know their psyche. They understand the territory. They know where their wounding lies. They know where their growthful edges are. They have a sense of where their resistances are. They know their defensive structures and how they operate. So they have good insight. And they are committed to keep going towards their wounded parts with enough skills, enough of a tool set to do that in a growthful and meaningful way, in a healing way. So we're talking about people that can tolerate discomfort, challenge, and uncertainty, and have a degree of resilience. But that's not a resilience that relies on defensive structures. That's a resilience that relies on having contact with our innermost core, with knowing who we are. People that are willing and resourced enough to engage continuously with their own deep work and the deep work of others. This is difficult work. Being in these territories is not light work, and it requires enough resourcing. People that have an empathic compassionate, generous presence. Generosity doesn't get talked about enough, but we have to be generous to lend ourselves so fully to the process of another for long amounts of time. And people that are theoretically informed from a very broad base, so what Kylia Taylor would call theoretical elasticity. And people that have familiarity with expanded states, of course. That goes without saying, but we're not talking about the egoic number crunching, how many ceremonies you've done or how many different substances you've taken. We're talking about integrated experiences that have really transmuted something meaningful for you, and as that process matures internally, the relationship with the expanded states matures internally. Ultimately, this is in service to the collective. So the model for us that this is a simple intervention done by well-meaning people, kind-hearted people, but relatively unskilled people, we don't think that will be sustainable. Equally, the idea that this can be done by professionally skilled people that have not properly delved in within themselves, they have not dismantled their defenses enough so they can approach life with enough capacity and compassion, we don't think that's sustainable either. So for us, when considering our training, we understood that this level of work can only be facilitated by group structures. There are certain spaces that individual work actually cannot get to in the same way. And in the unfolding of the course that we're running and in what we're learning with the people we're working with, is that we're really seeing the potency of a collective journey that supports the individual journey, but there's something that happens in the group space and in the collective space that is extremely powerful. The more the group relationship strengthens, the deeper we go. So in learning this work, the experiential components are by far, thank you, are by far the most important parts of the learning process. So Tim often likes to say that the deep psyche is often shy and tender. It opens best when it is supported. So the community building, the close bonds that people develop between them, the journey that they share are a crucial part of the process. It's these relationships that really support the unfolding. And we use a number of experiential methods in trying to get the people we work with and ourselves to these spaces. So we work holotropic breath work, we use psilocybin work in the Netherlands, systemic family constellation, social dreaming matrix, personal therapy, an indispensable part, group process, meditation, active imagination, and some other exercises. So weaving a potent mix of experiential models and methods can really create a transformative fairness. So that word has been used by someone in our training, in our closing circle, and it's really where we ended up. So a fairness is a potent place. It has a fire that needs group containings so that it can remain a flame, but it can also be contained. So it can warm up and not burn up, as my friend Cara says. So as we develop our relationship to expanded spaces, to expanded states, over time we really cultivate our closeness to the deep psyche. We cultivate our capacity to be close to the unconscious. And then that infuses all of our work, whether we work in expanded states or not. It's a language that becomes available to us. Deep inner work, healing, wisdom, these things really need their time to unfold. They cannot be forced open by any method or any facilitator. What we can do is surrender to our deeper currents and really work with what emerges from there. So our task is to find ways to make ourselves available to the work, available to this process, and allow the work and the process to gently take root within us. We support the rooting by holding reflective inquiry, engaging with our process, and integrating our experiences. So we present in our field change and transformation as a magical, wonderful, divine intervention act. that doesn't take much, happens in an instant. But a journey of healing will ask of us a lot. It will ask of us to change in unprecedented ways sometimes. And it will ask us to really let go of what no longer serves a growthful path ahead. And that's not always easy, because that sometimes requires that we dismantle the very defensive structures we have built our whole lives around. So that's not to be taken lightly. So as practitioners, we keep stepping into a field of change, a field that is in constant movement for other people, for extended periods of time. And it will require of us to step up to the impact of actually doing so. And the last thing I'm going to mention, and I think I can get away with it because I'm a female presenter and I'm a non-academic presenter, but the last mention I want to make is on love, which is at the heart of what we're really doing here. And I doubt it will be talked about much during the weekend. But love is at the heart of this work. This is really what we're trying to get to. It's really the most central task in any healing journey. The question is, how can we become available enough to receive love in undefended enough ways? How can we allow ourselves to deeply experience the love we have for others and ourselves, and allow it to be offered in safe and expansive ways? So how can we allow love to flow from the outside in and from the inside out? I don't think there's a more central task when we talk about healing. So to feel love and be loved is the deepest emotional necessity we all need to attend to. Early wounds create defenses, and these defenses obstruct that flow, and that affects our lives in many ways. And often this is the best defended space in us. So this is our most salient individual and collective task. If we want to usher in change, this is times of collective and intergenerational trauma. And these are times where we need healing from alienation, fragmentation, polarization, fear, mistrust, defendedness, war. And this is really where we need to find ways to get to safely. So for me and team, effective psychedelic training is not about working with psychedelics. It's about being able to work with the deep psyche. So the psychedelic healing potential is really enormous. It has the capacity to get to the heart of the matter, to shift through very well-ingrained conditioning, to unravel our defensive structures, to support consciousness expansion in ways that are truly unparalleled. And at the same time, this enormous potential requires really safe and skillful containers that can really support the depth and the breadth of the unfolding that they can offer us, that they can open us up to. So in our times of systemic challenge, from polarization to environmental breakdown, that we really have to somehow come to terms with and grapple with, these medicines have a really fundamental role to play. But to think of them as panacea, we know, is very naive, and it regurgitates some deeply ingrained attitudes that we have borrowed from our medical and psychiatric paradigms that don't offer adequate containers sometimes for this work. Skillful use of psychedelics really requires a paradigm that shifts our understanding of illness, health, repair, and regeneration. So there are two matters I really would like to address briefly here today. So one is the paradigm of healing as opposed to the paradigm of treatment. And the other is what depth relational process stands for and the need for integrating multiple theoretical perspectives so we can really support the enormous potential of the psychedelic experience. So psychedelic therapy has a very different trajectory to the medical and pharmaceutical trajectory, and there is a lot of unlearning we have to do if we are to do this work properly. And the most fundamental one is how can we move from reductive non-relational thinking to relational modes of thinking and working about illness and health. So I will outline 5 points of contrast between healing and treatment, and we will move them quite fast. So treatment rests on the principles of exclusion. So whereas healing relies on the powers of inclusion. So in treatment, what is seen as painful and undesirable is fragmented from the whole and treated in isolation. Healing work follows the movements of inclusion. It asks that we relate to our symptoms in really meaningful ways. The second point is that in the treatment paradigm, the agency is located primarily outside of us. It rests with a doctor or a pill or a course of treatment in the hope that it will free us from our unwanted symptoms. This is the magic bullet approach that we have heard a lot about in our field. In the healing paradigm, the primary agency rests firmly within us. So we might use pointers and guides from the outside, but the healing journey really requires our engagement and utmost participation. The third point is that whilst in treatment, the unconscious remains a separate and excluded part of the process, healing rests on a firm collaboration between conscious and unconscious, with input from both and hopefully greater integration of the two. So in treatment, whatever unconscious fact has been carried through by our symptoms into consciousness becomes silenced, and its integration into consciousness is a movement that remains incomplete. But in healing, inner movements are followed through to completion, some sort of completion, because we strive to really receive the message and the guidance of our unconscious through whatever way it finds its way through to us, whatever way it expresses itself. The fourth point is, whereas treatment exists at a fixed point in time, our engagement with the movements of healing is a lifelong journey, and it requires us to engage with the fullness of self throughout our lives, throughout its various cycles. So it's an ongoing process. And the final point I'd like to make is that, in contrast to the treatment modality that holds a very clear boundary between patient and expert, here the expert is the patient, and the healing process has to move organically through both patient and facilitator. So Carl Jung has said the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So in this work, we have to be impacted by the work. We have to enter the field of transformation. And sometimes this means that we have to dare to get slightly contaminated and then slightly cured ourselves. So despite their differences, both these modalities have a deep commitment to healing. They both have a desire to be in service and somehow restore human capacity, human body, human spirit. The yin and the yang of the world of repair and regeneration. What I want to acknowledge is that it's not about excluding one over the other. It's about acknowledging that the limitations and the strengths are really different, and one can really not replace the other. And there's going to be times where both are needed, and there's going to be times where we're going to have to find a way to really collaborate with these two models. So as the psychedelic field unfolds, we really have to recognize that there's a variety of voices in this field. There is a very wide dialogue that's in the psychedelic field, and that's what makes our field really exciting and alive. And moving forward, we're going to have to find a way to allow diversity of voices, to allow diversity in that dialogue, to allow diversity of ideas, approaches, perspectives, and perspectives that sometimes can be really incompatible. How can we really sit with that as a field and find our way forward? So we want clarity and certainty in our field, and it's a field that can become quite defensive and pretend it knows. There's a lot we don't know and we will never know, because psychological work and expanded states really have to sit with the not knowing, with the uncertain, with the unformed, until something organically emerges. So as a model, DRP holds its own assumptions. If we are to claim that we're assumption-free, that would be a total lie. So it's really important to outline this as we move forward. So I'm going to start with the terms. So depth relational process. Am I supposed to change this? Yeah. Depth because work in expanded states really opens up the deep psyche. There's no other way around that. So the capacity of the container to theoretically and otherwise match the depth and the breadth of the experience is extremely important. So here we meet our first assumption that goes against the grain of short-term fixes and solutions. So here we look at work that requires us to take time to really meet it. This is not about magic bullet, assume no responsibility approach. We need to go much deeper in our inquiry with this work. Relational because everything occurs in relational context. Every wounding and every healing will occur out of a relational structure. It's only through relationship that everything comes in and out of existence. There's no other way around it. So relationship is a key premise in psychotherapy. Cross-modality research always shows that it's the relationship that really matters, not the approach. It's the space between people. And every approach in psychotherapy has a particular relational focus. So if we look at psychodynamic theory, they look at early relationship. If attachment, the same. If we look at person-centered, they look at the relationship between therapist and client. If we look at existential, relationship to life and death. Gestalt, relationship to here and now. How do we utilize this wide relational field under one model is what me and Tim are really interested in. And we see this work as really helping us to deepen our relational capacity in multiple directions. So when we do this work, what can be impacted is relationship to self, to others, relationship to early caregivers, culture, how do we attend to our relationship with the plants we're working, to the divine, to earth, and everything in between. Process because inner work, healing is a continuously unfolding journey. Doing our inner work is something we can always engage with. So we're interested in the work we do in a long-term approach. We're interested in successive exposures to expanded states, supporting by psychotherapeutic input in between, ongoing integration. We think that health and well-being can really be a sense of connectedness and meaningness, meaning and purpose in life can really be supported by engaging with our inner worlds in an ongoing way, because healing is non-linear. Integration is a multi-layered process. It unfolds over time. Some of it will unfold from us purposefully engaging with it, and some of it will unfold much later in time, organically. But we have to remain attentive for that to happen. So to be committed to the ongoing nature of our inner work is to move away from the idea that there's an end point to our inner work, that there's a point where everything is fixed and we don't need to worry about things anymore. Some of our deepest wounds will always be there, perhaps in different tint or shape or form or intensity. Hopefully they won't pull us into unconscious the same way as at the start of our work, but perhaps the purpose of our deepest inner wounds is to consistently keep us going back into the work and engaging with self rather than just disappear. Hopefully it's time we meet them, we can meet them with more openness, with more learning and more compassion to all that we are. So always becoming, never become. And I'm going to rush through the 10 pillars of the model. So think this as an open system. It's in development, it's organic, we don't need it fixed, we don't need it to be that. These are the ideas that are coming forward. So the first layer would be psychedelic science and what we have learned from working with the substances from clinical trials in certain clinical conditions and treatment-specific and controlled settings. The second layer is the skills related to supporting preparation and integration. A practitioner that opens the space needs to know how to close the space and how to prepare participants for re-emerging back from the deep psyche into everyday life and the subsequent reintegration into the system structures and communities. So during the psychedelic experience, our task as facilitators is to be fully present. That's really all there is. So in the session itself, it's the participant and their own inner healing intelligence that are the experts of what needs to unfold. For many of us, this involves a substantial paradigm shift in how we work. We're no longer the expert. We don't deal with the patient. We meet people on a human-to-human level, on a soul-to-soul level very often, and we bring every fiber of our being to the participatory encounter. So this presence can only be supported by getting to know ourselves deeply, being able to move internally in as wide and vast a space as possible. Psychodynamic and attachment perspectives. Attachment theories show us, so we're on a similar page, how our early relational patterns and shapes with those that cared for us become deeply embedded into the structures of how we relate to the world later on, not only to the outside world, but to the internal world very often. So that's an imprint that develops in the early infancy and childhood, and it continues to operate in adult life, mostly on an unconscious level, which is what makes it really problematic. But experiences in expanded states can reinforce or radically disrupt and repair these early attachment structures. And that is where a lot of their enormous potential lies. So from a psychodynamic perspective, this can be highlighted in what happens in the space between facilitator and practitioner. And I think my co-speakers talked about the transferential dynamics that are really amplified in this space. So how can we skillfully respond rather than react to these expressions is really what we have to learn to do as facilitators. How can we really use this as useful openings for repair rather than traumatic reenactments? We'll move through the rest. So the fifth pillar is the essential capacity of working in trauma-informed ways. So we can support resolution and healing, and we can avoid re-traumatization. So traumatic memories that can emerge in expanded states, some of them may have narratives and stories attached to them and memories, and some of them will be deeply embodied beneath conscious memory, or even arise from wider collective and sociopolitical experiences. They may not necessarily belong to the person that's in the room with us, but they're carried by the person's body, consciousness, deep psyche. So it's really important to be able to support our clients to regulate through such processes and facilitate release with somatic methods of support. The sixth pillar is transpersonal psychology. So here we're looking at the higher and spiritual aspects of human consciousness. So we have Groff's maps of consciousness and his work on birth perinatal matrices, really important work when we're working with psychedelic states, the idea that people may be re-experiencing their early birth trauma. We have Carl Jung's understanding of the symbolic, mythic, and archetypal representations of the deep psyche, alongside the wisdom and practices of Eastern spiritual traditions that can really help us understand these territories from very useful perspectives. Seventh pillar, being able to work with spiritual emergency and emergence, problematic manifestations of the deep psyche that may emerge after a psychedelic experience, and how do we keep them meaningful, growthful, purposeful? How do we support the birthing in this process? So practitioners need to be skilled in supporting the ego death rebirth process and engage with meaningful ways with challenging and overwhelming psychedelic experiences. Getting there. Eighth. Indigenous shamanic and animistic perspectives. So at the heart of this ancient medicine practices is the tribal perspective of initiation, a process of deep transformation that is held through ritual frameworks and an animated experience of the world, a sense of animism. And animism is about relationality. The minute we start talking about animistic frameworks and perspectives, we're talking about deeply relational frames. And how can we relate with the unseen dimensions and forces of life? The resolution of intergenerational and ancestral trauma that arises often through such experiences. We can understand this both from indigenous perspectives that attend to the ancestral lineage material that's in the work and in how they relate to the medicine and their practices and the frameworks. And we have some Western paradigms that also attend to intergenerational ancestral trauma. We have the field of epigenetics, we have systemic family constellations, and some strands of psychotherapy that pay attention to it. So practitioners need to have an understanding of the importance and emotional vitality of this work, the psychic energy that becomes available once this work is attended to. And the 10th and final aspect is what we have called ecosystemic approaches. So this is the space of honoring the interconnectedness that permeates our inner and outer walls. And as facilitators, it's about working from our right place and size in service to the greater whole we are part of. So this is about really aligning with the deeper movements of nature, the cycles of death and rebirth, the instinctive movements that bring us into greater alignment and flow, the connection with mystery, the oneness, the deep surrendering to what is. So, like I said, it's a model that's under development, and we see it as an open system, not a prescriptive system. And we really hope to bring a model that can grow in a way that supports contradicting points of view to find a place to create a dialogue and coexist in a place. And we think that collaboration across polarities and divides is at the heart of psychedelic ethos. So while there's going to be very divergent approaches, we cannot really underestimate the paradigm change that is intrinsic in working with expanded states and psychedelic medicines in this space, and the ripples of change that have already been set in motion from the amazing work that you're going to hear over the next few days from many people that have really committed their work to ushering this change forward. Thank you very much.